Okay, let's start off. um, we had finished with the Glorious Revolution and then the uh, installation of William and Mary of Orange as rulers. I had also talked to you that this is a time when the Hobbesian idea of surrendering rights to the sovereign in exchange for good rule, which is peaceful. This was something that happened in the case of England, and I also talked to you about how Edmund Burke uh, and Thomas Paine had a falling out, though they were very good friends. They fell out on this particular idea. Burke believed that a promise was made, it was a contract, and therefore, even for subsequent generations, one had to uh, surrender the rights. But Thomas Paine thought that was complete nonsense. He said, what doesn't belong to you, you cannot uh, give away to others. Okay, so he wrote those two essays, uh, Common Sense and The Rights of Man. Anyway, um, I told you the next big the next big step was who to find as rulers of England. After William and Mary of Orange, obviously, when they were gone, then the problem came as to who will rule England. So again, when we actually keep saying people, but the reality is that it is not the common people, but it is the parliament that used to decide who will become the future king. This started, I told you, the biggest watershed moment for politics um, and democracy the world over is King Henry VIII's conversion of uh, the whole of the British nation or England to Protestantism. Okay, that is a watershed movement. And I had also told you that there were other things that happened, such as the rise of extreme forms of Protestantism. We talked about Puritanism in England. It was called Puritanism. And this was something that gained a lot of currency during the dozen years of rule of Oliver Cromwell. And in Scotland, the extreme form was called uh, Presbyterianism. It is still there, the Scottish Presbyterian Church, the Anglican Puritan Church is still there. And in France, you had John Calvin, who ushered in this kind of thing, and so it came to be called Calvinism. And if you actually look at, if you actually take a look at what happened um, in France under Calvin, I told you that he ordered the execution of um, a 1-year-old infant for disobeying its mother. So that was the extent to which these were radicalized Protestantism. But it also generated the Protestant ethic. And I will deal with the Protestant ethic separately. But in order to understand the Protestant ethic, you have to remember the Reformation. Okay, because it was the Reformation that actually generated the Protestant ethic as far as Max Weber is concerned. And King Henry VIII's act of converting an entire country to Protestantism and proclaiming himself as the head of the Anglican Church or the Church of England instead of a religious figure, that also has to be seen as a very important development in the movement towards democracy. I keep telling people that, we as a nation, that is, we meaning Indians, as a nation, we got democracy all of a sudden, okay, till 11:49, or let's use the 24-hour clock, till 23, not 49, 59. We were a nation that of August 14th, 1947, we were not a nation that ever experienced democracy. But 0 hours of 15th August, we became a democracy. And everybody in the country over the age of 21 years and possessing a sound mind, all these people became eligible to be voters. So we had universal adult franchise the moment India became India. I told you, please remember that the right-wing historians, they keep arguing that India as an idea is very old. and that the basis that they use to make this argument is they say that everybody knew about the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Vedas, and all these texts. People say people knew them all over the country. So it was a nation. There is an iota of truth in it. I say an iota of truth because, yes, everybody knew this, but what you must remember is that all these people uh, are unable to distinguish uh, between different forms of nationalism. So, what we had was cultural nationalism. I told you, nationalism comes from the Latin natio, and natio basically means one. So, nationalism is a feeling of oneness. We are all one. That is the this thing. That is the underlying meaning of nationalism, and you will find that we might have existed as a nation. Uh, we culturally, and we also saw that what contributed to this cultural nationalism is the cross pollination among uh, different cultures. Like, for example, if you look at, uh, if you basically look at, uh, sorry, if you basically look at the Muslims in India, they wear black beads after they get married, the women, and they wear toe rings, okay, which is not done in any other part of the world by Muslims. And we have the Christians who have the tying of the Mangal Sutra, and the Mangal Sutra and its importance are actually talked about in the marriage sermon by the priest, and then they have the throwing of that rice, yellow rice, red rice, whatever. Okay, and so and if you also look at the urs of Khwaja Chishti, okay, who was also called Banda Nawaz. Khwaja Chishti's Urs in Ajmer is attended by more Hindus than Muslims, perhaps. Okay, so you see, so there has been this cross pollination. So, culturally, yes, there was a nationalism. And it's not only the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and all those things. It also percolated down to practices such as weddings, funerals. They might be ultimately different, but the way in which one went around conducting these practices was very similar. It continues to be similar even today. So, political nationalism was what was missing. Gandhi, I repeat again, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was the person who was responsible for bringing political nationalism and creating a political entity called India. A political India was created in the freedom movement by Gandhi, and when we became independent, This idea of a political India was given further impetus by Nehru, contrary to all the nonsensical propaganda that you will be hearing about how these people were completely bad people, Gandhi and Nehru and all of them. Okay. But you have to agree that the modern Indian nation after independence was built by Nehru. There's no doubt about that. But the point that I'm trying to make anyway is the fact that from being a colony, from being a country that did not ever have the kind of boundaries that it had at 0 hours on the 15th of August 1947, that was a big bang moment politically, because there was this entity called India, which is a political entity, and it adopted institutions from the British. We didn't have, we didn't go back to any of our old institutions. The only old institutions that Gandhi wanted to go back to was the panchayat system. And the panchayat system that we have adopted is a synthetic one. It's not the original panchayat system. The original panchayat system was very different. Okay, some small little concession was given to Gandhi, and people will tell you that Gandhi and Nehru, they were inseparable. Nehru became uh, prime minister only because of Gandhi. So all that is nonsense. Uh, they had great differences. Nehru believed in industrial development, and Gandhi believed in Gram Swaraj. He didn't really want a politically huge India. At another time, I'll talk about this in a little bit of detail. Maybe do a one class over this. But Gandhi didn't even want railways. You'll be quite surprised to know that. He didn't want the movement of population from one place to another. He wanted Gram Swaraj. He wanted every village to be self governed and self sustaining. Okay. So that was his idea of what India should be, because he said India lives in its villages, and therefore he wanted Gram Swaraj. But Nehru didn't agree with that. He believed in industries and dams being the new temples of India. Right. So we had this big bang moment, and the big bang moment was that we basically found ourselves with democracy all of a sudden, with political institutions almost all of a sudden, and these were all Western imports. These were all Western imports. But if you look at the West, which is what we are doing, the process of evolution of institutions, and specifically into democratic institutions, is something that took a few hundred years. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, it, if you really look at it, it does look like it took almost, you know, 10 centuries for the parliament to stop being a feudal body and become a democratic institution. Okay. So that is in the context of Britain. I'm talking about this in the context of Britain, right? So, and it was the I told you the key moments of the Lancastrians. Then again later on it was Henry VIII. That is the most important moment that you have to remember. And after Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and then we see that it was under William and Mary of Orange that England did have a reasonable prosperity. But later on, they needed somebody to replace them with. And therefore, you will find that the Parliament, it's always the Parliament who went in search of new kings. They went in search of a new dynasty, okay, who would become kings of, or who would become rulers of England. Okay, though the parliament wanted to run the show, but it wanted to have a king on the top. So, what do? They dig out a person called, some people write this spelling, some people write this spelling.
Which is correct, sir?
Frankly, I don't know. I think it is PHIA, which is correct.
Sir, but pronunciation you'll pronounce as Sophia only, no, sir?
No, it's Sophia. This is not Sophia. It's only the Greek goddess who is pronounced as Sophia. And it is, apart from the Greek goddess, you have a mosque somewhere in Belgium, I think, which is also called the Mosque of Sophia. So there are a few exceptions, but this was not Sophia, she was Sophia. And of Hanover. Hanover, as you know very well, is in Germany. Okay, they found that she had British antecedents, and what they did is they decided to go look for her and find her family and bring them back to England and make them the new king or kings or whatever of England. Okay, so they found out about Sophia of Hanover. Okay, and Sophia of Hanover had two sons who took on the names. Okay, George first and George second, but we'll talk about George first, obviously. He's first, right? So if you look at George first, George first was 56 years old. Did not know English, this is very, very important. This particular development is yet another important development. It's a watershed moment in the whole evolutionary process of the British Parliament. Okay, so 56 years old, did not know English. Now, he had no idea of the customs and traditions, the political ones, that is, of the British. He had no idea. He was a foreigner. Suddenly, they picked him up from Germany, Hanover. They said, this is the Hanoverian dynasty. They were given this name. The Hanoverian dynasty. And, well, so there you have a king who didn't know the language, who didn't know the culture, who didn't know the customs, who didn't know the political practices, nothing. So here is this abject figure, pathetic figure, who's not even young and has the, what should we say, has the drive to learn new things. He didn't want all that. George the First was quite happy that he was made the king, and he depended on the parliament to give him information about various different things, which included governance, and he wanted the parliament's guidance in ruling the, what should we say, ruling the British Isles. Okay, so this is the moment when the parliament becomes really powerful. Okay, it becomes really powerful. And what we do see is that for the first time ever, you have the formation of Council of Ministers. Okay, now I told you, ministers, I think it was Akshay who pointed it out. I don't know. That ministers is a word that comes from Christian religion, and it comes from ministrations, which is also the source of administration. Okay, so just as you had God being represented by the Pope and several ministers who were a part of the clergy taking care of various aspects of the church, they replicated that kind of a model in the creation of the Council of Ministers, whereas instead of the Pope, you had the king. Okay, You had the king, and he was supposed to be assisted by the Council of Ministers in administering the country. That is basically the story. Now, that is how the word ministers comes in. And the Americans, we'll be talking about them next, because their revolution is completely different and it's a much shorter story than the story of Britain. It's probably not even half or a quarter of a length of the story of Britain, because it's, after all, not even 300 years old properly. So what kind of a history will they have? So if you look at this thing in America, they call them secretaries. They don't call them ministers. Okay. And the president. So nowhere do they use anything that comes from religion. But we'll talk about that later. That's not now. In England, they found it a convenient thing just to pick these terms up and start using them. Anyway, the king is the head of the church. Please remember that. That is the reason why these people called themselves the ministers. Okay? Though the religious head was the archbishop, the real head of the church was the king. So obviously these people called themselves ministers. That is how ministers came into politics. Now this didn't solve too many problems. Okay? Here are a group of people who designated themselves ministers. This was done mainly by the Lords. Some people from the House of Commons were also taken into consideration. They laid down certain criteria. I'm not going to go into all that because I'm not going to be teaching you British constitutional history. But if anybody is interested, please let me know. I will have a one-on-one or one-on-two kind of a class where I'll give you what exactly were the criteria that were laid down for the formation of the Council of Ministers. Okay, and so you'll see that the Council of Ministers was formed, and the Council of Ministers could not communicate with the king because they didn't know German. The king didn't know English. That is the main problem. So how do they converse with each other? So they needed a via media, and that via media turned out to be somebody from the House of Commons and not from the House of Lords. He was Sir Robert Walpole. Anyone who heard this name?
Father of British Parliament.
Father of British Parliament.
Yes, sir. His sobriquet.
Who gave him the sobriquet?
I don't know, but he's called as a father of British Parliament.
No,
First
please.
Prime Minister.
Huh?
First Prime Minister.
That is okay, but the father of the British Parliament, no. British Parliament was set up in 1066. We are talking here in the 18th century. Okay, so where is the question of his being? Kavya is right. He was designated Prime Minister. Okay. There was no office of the Prime Minister before. But with Sir Robert Walpole, the designation of Prime Minister came into being. Do you know why, Kavya? He was indeed the first Prime Minister anywhere in the world, not just of the British Parliament. Hmm?
Yes, sir.
Why was he made the Prime Minister?
Don't know, sir.
Don't know. Okay. It's actually a very, very simple reason.
He has to mediate for the king and the ministers.
So why couldn't somebody else do it?
Because he know the, I think, two languages.
Yeah. He knew both German and
English.
English as well as French. Okay. So Robert Walpole was polyglot. He could speak many languages. And it wasn't an easy process, the appointment of Robert Walpole as the Prime Minister, considering the fact by then the Lords had designated themselves as the upper house, and they said they have more powers than the House of Commons, which they said is a lower house. So here is somebody from the lower house who becomes the Prime Minister. So the Lords tried to resist this. They did try to a great extent. They didn't succeed. They didn't succeed for one simple reason. That is because they couldn't find a replacement for him, one who could speak both these languages and, if necessary, be a diplomat and even speak French and other European languages. Okay, like I said, he was polyglot. So, but you would have heard of this, right? The Prime Minister is equals.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. These people were trying to make sure that the Prime Minister doesn't become more powerful than the rest of the Council of Ministers or individual members of the Council of Ministers. So the House of Lords kept insisting that he is Prime Minister only because of the fact that he knew both the languages. Okay, and therefore they said he is the first among equals. Later on, you have prime ministers like Lord Pitt, who were from the upper house. Okay, they were from the upper house, but even they were not considered to have any special powers. They were only emissaries between the king and the parliament. Okay, that's how the office of the prime minister came into being. It was not by design. It was not by design, right? So you have this situation now where you have a council of ministers and you have a king and you have a parliament and you also had a judicial system. Okay, magistrates were appointed by the king at the instance of the parliament. Now, good old Baron de Montesquieu saw this whole thing and got completely confused and decided that in England there were three separate branches of government. So he said there is a parliament, there is a king who is the executive, and there is some kind of a primitive judiciary. And he proposed that in order to stop kings from becoming tyrants, one had to basically, um, you know, one had to basically break or separate these powers, which is also called a system of checks and balances, right? We could also understand it as a banking thing. You issue a check for a certain amount and see how much balance is still left. And this is the spelling that the Americans use for the check. We write CHEQUE, which is the French spelling, but the Americans write this as the spelling for check, the bank check. Anyway, so this is how you have the evolution. People were then given portfolios. What is a portfolio?
Ministry.
No, actually, what we call file, F-I-L-E, file, is short for a portfolio. Folio is a paper. A portfolio is putting together of papers. Many years before you were born, when the banks had not been computerized, when I was still a small kid, uh, I used to be sent to the bank by my father. And while filling up this thing, you had to write your account number and also a folio number. Then they would see which book, which page that accounts details will be found. So it is also used in banking, not just in politics. Okay, so when people were given portfolios, it is called a portfolio because they had to maintain a record, a file. You had to file documents. Okay, you had to file documents and maintain a record. And that is how ministers started having designations. Even today, people say, when somebody is given, say, when Nirmala Sitaraman was given the Ministry of Finance, uh, it was reported by at least one newspaper, I remember, which was Hindu, which said that the portfolio of finance minister was given to Nirmala Sitaraman. Okay, so that word is still very much in vogue. Okay, because it is a documentation of papers pertaining to a particular ministry and its activities. So that's how the word portfolio came into the political system. Anyway, so they continued with this idea that the prime minister is only the first among equals. They continued with that idea because it was believed that he didn't have any special powers. Okay. And the parliament wanted to exercise all the powers that it possibly could as one united body rather than as a body that is divided, because they thought, you have that saying in English, united we stand, divided we fall. So that was their motto. They wanted to stand united so that they don't fall. Now, all this happened in the time of George I, and it got consolidated further in the time of George II, who was only slightly better than George I when it comes to the English language and the understanding of the customs and traditions of the British. You must remember one thing, that there is probably no other nation in the world that values its customs and traditions as much as Britain does, or the UK now.
Conventions.
Conventions, yes. They're all customs, traditions, conventions. Yes, that also, it can be used. It values all these. Okay, even today, when the Queen, it is the Queen, when she addresses the joint sessions of the Parliament, which means where she will talk to both the House of Lords, members of the House of Lords, and members of the House of Commons. When she talks to them, even today, the Commons don't sit. Okay? They don't sit. Only the Lords sit. The Commons stand at the doors. What is the British system of parliamentary democracy model? What, it has a name. What model?
Parliamentary God.
No. There's a particular name. The parliamentary model has a particular name.
Westminster. Westminster.
Who gave me this answer?
Rachana.
Correct. You're right. It's called the... Ma'am, you came very late.
Yes, sir. I
I'll-
actually I joined at 5:30 exactly. It took time and I forgot. Now I joined.
Okay. Westminster. Do you know why it's called the Westminster model?
Maybe it is Western countries, no?
No,
I don't know, sir, exactly.
the parliament is actually building, the building in which it was built, I mean, in which the people met, was called Westminster Abbey. Have you heard of an abbey? Anyone?
No, sir.
No. Abbey is a place in which it is some kind of a monastery. Okay. Or a place, no, I can't type all that now. A place where monks used to live. Okay, a monastery. Shaolin Temple, for example, 36th Chamber of Shaolin, very famous film in my younger, very young days, that they're all monks. Okay, so the Westminster Abbey was an abbey, and an abbey, by the way, is headed by an abbot, right? So it stopped being an abbey and it became the parliament. And therefore, this system of parliamentary democracy is actually called the Westminster model because of where it is situated. Because please remember that while we have borrowed the Westminster model almost as it is, countries like Canada, which have a parliamentary form of government, have a very different kind of a parliamentary form of government. For example, they have federalism. Their constitution mentions federalism, and that was the first constitution in the world, the first parliamentary form of government and its constitution, which talked about federalism. Otherwise, there was no federalism in the parliamentary system. So even in India, we talk about federalism, but please read the parliament. Amulya bought a book called The Parliament of India, no, the Constitution of India or something. And I also have this book here. No, this is showing. So constitutional government. If
Who is
you,
the author, sir?
M.V. Piley, the great M.V. Piley, Professor M.V. P-Y-L-E-E. You should, every one of you should read that book. He's a great writer, fantastic writer. His insights into Indian constitutionalism are amazing. They are amazing. Okay, somebody stole a copy of my book. So only the other day I found it online. I thought that Sultan Chand and company, who are the publishers, had gone out of business. No, they haven't. They are still publishing. And thank God for them, this book is available again. Okay, and they also have one by A.C. Kapoor, which is called Select Constitutions. If you have that, you can also make a comparative study. You can make a comparative study between the Canadian Constitution and the British Constitution, and you'll see that they are quite different. Okay, so we have adopted the Westminster model. They have not adopted the Westminster model, the Canadians. They have
Sir,
decided.
we followed the Canadian model of constitution, isn't it?
We tried to incorporate some much later, not initially. We tried to incorporate some of the things from the Canadian Parliament, but our early constitution writers were reluctant to go for federalism because they were scared that we will again break up. Our problem has been that we generally divide ourselves without too much help. Okay, so people say the British divided us, but ours has always been a divided society in some ways, united society in other ways. So you will see that, you will basically see that the original Constituent Assembly was not very keen on adopting federalism. That is why you do not find that particular word anywhere. Okay, you do not find that particular word in our constitution. If you're interested, I have a website. Okay. In this website, there are different heads. There is one head which is called research articles. There is another head which is called lessons. And there are there is a third one called perspectives. And I have also posted, I've also put a section called web links. Any important web link that is useful to people. Okay, it's been around for 10 years or more now. Okay. All the articles are not written by me. It's not like Khan Academy. Okay. I would want you to look at this particular, especially Mr. Akshay.
Yes, sir.
Just look for this article. These are the words that are important. The federalization of a parliamentary system. And the article is by a very renowned professor, Professor Mahendra Prasad Singh.
Yeah, sir, in class you already intimated.
Who said that?
Amulya, sir.
But I am talking to Akshay. Akshay doesn't know about this. So, or it might just look for MP Singh. Okay, Professor MP Singh. The federal, these are the keywords. I don't remember the whole title. where he draws parallels from the Canadian system, and he tries to look at uh, how we should go for federalism in India. He and there is another professor, there are some articles by him, Professor Balveer Arora, who is now the honorary chairman of the Center for Multi-Level Federalism. These are people who are talking about uh, a form of government in India, which they say should be cooperative federalism, because at one time we did see a bit of federalization, and at that time it became competitive federalism, especially between the undivided Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, and between Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, to attract to investments. So these people distinguish between competitive federalism and cooperative federalism, and they prefer the latter.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah.
Most of them criticize that Ambedkar copied all the constitutions of the world and pasted in Indian constitution. What is your take?
My take on that is complete rubbish. Ambedkar didn't sit and write the constitution. First and foremost, get that straight. In 1946, elections were held to create a constituent assembly, which, by the way, is considered to be the first legislature of India, the Constituent Assembly. In the Constituent Assembly, there were a number of subcommittees dealing with various different subjects. At the behest of Mahatma Gandhi, uh, Dr. Ambedkar, who had done his PhD in or DPhil, I think. He did one from Columbia and he did another from Oxford. And he was uh, a person who had a very good understanding of this model. So it was at the instance of uh, Gandhi that he was made the chairman of the drafting committee of the uh, parliament, drafting committee of the Constitution of India. Now, if you read the debates that took place in the, what should we say, Constituent Assembly, there is one particular debate which concerns itself with the preamble. Okay. And I think it is J.B. Kripalani, who was called Acharya J.B. Kripalani, who objected to the usage of the word sovereign. You, I suppose, know that secular and socialist were not there originally, right? They were not there originally. They were added on by Indira Gandhi by the 42nd or 44th Amendment.
44th.
44th. Thank you. Thank you.
42nd Amendment, sir. It is
42nd.
called a mini constitution.
42nd?
Yes,
Okay.
in
Thank you.
1976.
Yes, 1976. Correct. That is when the words secular and socialist were added. Yeah. So before that, the preamble didn't have it. It only said, we, the people of India, have solemnly decided to be a sovereign. And this is the part that Kripalani objected to. his thing was that why are we calling ourselves a sovereign thing, sovereign country? Because our constitution, this is a fact that very few people know, our constitution, basically 80% or more of it at the time of inception was nothing but the uh, nothing but the Government of India Act of 1935.
1930. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
80% or more was the Government of India Act of 1935. That had things like diarchy and communal electorates, which were removed. And uh, well, see, when you're forming, we had no experience with democracy. Please remember one thing. We had no experience with democracy, and therefore we had no experience with constitutions as well, right? And therefore, we basically had to look at various different constitutions to see what kind of things can be incorporated into our constitutions, sorry. And so they were the members of the subcommittees who studied different constitutions. The British Constitution, I told you there are some written um, parts of it. The Irish Constitution, the American Constitution, from where we got the preamble. Okay, so we also studied the Canadian Constitution. We studied these things and incorporated different things from different constitutions. And I don't think that is something that we should feel bad about. See, today, look at the country. It is such a big country. It is a population that is very shortly, thanks to COVID, I don't know, but otherwise it is poised to touch 140 crores. Okay,
China's population is 139. Our population is 136 crores.
right now, but we are
Yes,
going
sir.
to overtake them shortly.
Yes, sir.
We are poised to overtake, I said. We are poised to overtake. And China has much bigger territory, by the way. Much, much bigger territory than ours. Territorially, we are the 7th biggest country in the world. China is 3rd or 4th. So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that not having had any experience with democracy, it is not a very bad thing to go around looking at various constitutions to see and get an understanding of how to have a good constitution. But the fact of the matter remains that even today, after various, and by the way, the Constituent Assembly, after it had zeroed down on the first draft of the Constitution, this draft was circulated among common people. This draft was circulated among common people, and they were asked to give their suggestions regarding the Constitution. And there were some 7,000 plus amendments suggested totally when the document was was circulated, of which I think 721 or something like that were actually incorporated as amendments, and the rest were ignored because it was considered to be against the national interest to uh, put those suggestions or to incorporate those suggestions into the Constitution. Anyway, so that is I think I said it's a 1 hour class, so I think I should close here today. Hmm? Let's find out if Madam Padma Navanand is still there. Is she here?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
You went for a jaunt and came back, no? So you tell me, ma'am, should I stop here or should I just go ahead and finish off the rest? That'll take a bit of time. I think I'll stick to my word.
Yes, sir, we'll stick to 1 hour.
Yeah. Okay. Padma is she's getting tired of me. Hmm?
No, sir, not really.
Hmm. But these classes are not like political theory classes. Those are, as you
Yes, sir.
called them, heavy. And I
These are
was
interesting. Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Which is interesting, this or political theory?
This one is interesting. Why? Because it is linked to contemporary daily newspaper like this.
Okay.
Whatever you teach, it is interesting, sir.
Yes.
No. Don't do that, Akshay.
It is real, sir.
Yes, sir. It is
Yeah.
absolutely true.
You're
It's not any
inviting
exaggeration
huge
at all.
trouble. Don't do that.
Really, sir. Promisely speaking.
Anyway, I am now in a very peculiar position. Let me tell you this joke, and let me tell you this joke and close the class. Since last evening, I have been getting a number of WhatsApp messages from my friends in school and in college. Okay, and they were saying, we are listening to your lectures. And one of them says, hey, dude, you're knowledgeable. And I said, how did these fellows get to listen to my lectures? Apparently, one friend went to YouTube to search something, and by accident, he found my lectures. And so he was there with me from school, and he was also there in college. So he circulated that news among some close friends, and they have been now sending their opinions on my lectures, all of which are not flattering. Some of them think that I should shut up, which is probably what you people also think.
No, sir.
Not at all, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. We'll go by what Madame Padma Navanand says. Stop. So we stop. Okay, so we'll finish this tomorrow. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
sir.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.